Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this discussion, sponsored by the New England chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. My name is Rebecca Gatto, and I'm here this afternoon with Gay Talese, one of the great journalists of our time. Talese is a pioneer of new journalism, the literary scene-setting style of reporting that often placed the writer at the center of the story. His legendary feature, Frank Sinatra Has a Cold, was hailed by Vanity Fair as the greatest literary nonfiction story of the 20th century. It was also declared the best story Esquire's ever published and is considered one of the greatest celebrity profiles ever written. He's the author of nearly 20 books and has been married to his wife, Nan, for about 65 years. They've lived together in this Manhattan brownstone, where we're recording since 1958. So, Mr. Talese, thank you so much for having us. To start, you said to Esquire that you never wanted to be a 5W reporter, that you wanted to be, I'm quoting you, a fucking writer. And that your stars were all fiction writers. So today it's possible to say, I want to write nonfiction like Gay Talese, but you had to figure it out for yourself. So where did you start?
Well, I started as a high school student reading fiction. I wrote mostly short stories that I read in the Saturday Evening Post or the New Yorker. The library had the New Yorkers. And Collier's Magazine, a lot of good fiction writers, John O'Hara, Irwin Shaw, sometimes even the stories of Faulkner and Hemingway were reprinted. I like the short story form, but I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a journalist from the time I was 11. When I was 11 in 1943, the New York Yankees trained in Atlantic City, which is 10 miles away from Ocean City, where I was born. And so I would go to watch the spring training, and I watched sports writers. I thought, what a job. What a great job to be a sports writer. Travel with the Yankees. God, you can't beat that. That was my dream. When I finally became 21 and graduated from college, I was still a journalism major. But I didn't want to be a journalist in the sense of news reporting. I didn't want to cover news. I wanted to cover non-news. And my model was to be a short story writer of factual people, real names, real situations, nothing fabricated, nothing falsified, all of it verifiably journalistic, but the story form, character, dialogue, interior monologue, what people are thinking. So this was not necessarily receptive to the needs of journalism at the time. And I confess to you, when I first started writing for the New York Times, most of my ideas were rejected. Not all of them, but many of, if not most of them, were. Because it was a paper of record. It was a newspaper. It wasn't a literary journal. It wasn't the Paris Review. Still, enough of my stories got in to make it worthwhile to do more of the same. And getting in time, my taste in story selection was accepted more often than not by the editors. So I was there from 1956 to 1965. And many of my stories became known. And if they weren't on the daily paper, they were in the Sunday magazine. Or if not in the Sunday magazine at the time, they were in Esquire. I was writing Esquire in 1960. So I was getting my work out there in a new form, short story form, novelistic in its tone, but real and verifiable. That's how I started. I never called it the New Journal. Tom Wolfe, my friend Tom Wolfe, I knew him when he worked on the Herald Tribune in 1962. He coined this phrase and put me at the head of the class. I was a little embarrassed because I wasn't sure I was the head of any class. But it gave a little bit of credentials to what I did, what I tried to do.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I studied it when I was studying journalism. So so you're doing something that's getting rejected often. It's something that's new. How did you develop your skills as a writer? And when did you start to feel like you finally hit your stride, that you were writing the way you wanted to write?
Well, when I was 1961, I think I was 29 or 28, something. I had collected enough stuff in the New York Times to have a book. I published a book in 1961. Harper was the publisher. It was called New Yorker Surge Up in His Journey. And that really, the guy had a book, and I was 29, and I was a reporter. But what I was reporting at the Times was good enough to be in hardcovers in this collection. That established me in a way. And then I also, in 1962, a year later, became interested in the construction of the Verrazano Bridge between Brooklyn and Staten Island. I had my days off, weekends off, and whatever time I had beside that from the paper. I would go to Staten Island law in Brooklyn, watch the builders build the bridge, the ironworkers, people on high steel, elevators up to the tower, walking across catwalks. All this was exciting to me. And I described what it's like to build a bridge, the greatest bridge in the world at that time, the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. I wrote about the workmen who usually don't know their names. We know the Great Brooklyn Bridge, but we don't know who built it. We know the engineer, but we don't know who actually put the bricks on top of bricks and steel on top of steel and the handiwork. When I went to do the Verrazano, I made sure I got the names and the stories of the actual builders of the bridge, the laborers, not the engineer alone, just the laborers. And that was a pretty good book. And that came out in 1964, I think it was, The Bridge. Then the collection of it came out, Fame and Obscurity, some of my magazine pieces. So I was, before I was 31. I had three short books, but nice books. In 1965, I was 32 or 33. I had worked at the Times for almost 10 years. I had a lot of stories published. Also published at Esquire during my free time. And I thought, I want to write longer and take more time. So I quit the paper. It was sad because I loved working there. But I'd been there almost 10 years. And I didn't see me doing anything in the next 10 years I hadn't done in the previous 10 years. I wanted to be more of a writer than a journalist. And so I wanted writer's hours. I wanted to take a year to write something if I wanted to. I wanted to travel without having worried about I have to be back at the office on Monday because I have to work on Monday to Friday. I wanted freedom, really. So I left the paper in 1965. For 1 year, 65 to 66, I had a 1-year contract with Esquire to do 6 pieces a year. For a whole year with 6 pieces. One of them was Frank Sinatra. I didn't want to do it. They asked me to do it. That turned out to be a famous piece. You read it as a student, you probably. But I did many other things. And then I started writing. I loved the New York Times, and I started writing a book about it. I thought, well, so in 67, I quit Esquire. But I got a contract for $11,000, I think it was, to write a book about the New York Times. It took me 5 years. It came out in 1969, called The Kingdom and the Power. It became a bestseller. So I had some money. And I also met a story. I wrote a story when I was on the New York Times about the Bonanno crime family. Bill Bonanno, son of Joe Bonanno. So after I wrote the New York Times book, I got a contract to write the book about the Bill. I talked to Bill Bonanno a lot, and I finally got his permission to write about him and use his name. That was quite an accomplishment with the mafia, the secret society. I spent a few years on that book, and that became a best. Honor Thy Father, the little television show with it. And so I was really becoming a writer of nonfiction, but also, as I said before, the novelistic storytelling approach. Both of those books, in fact, everything I wrote before or after was a story. I was a storyteller. I wasn't a reporter. I was a reporter, yes, but more than that, I was a storyteller. And that I did Thy Neighbor's Wife. I did on Writer's Life, and I did later on The Voyeur's Motel, and the latest book, my New York stories. One of the book I'm speaking to you now in 2025, and a book of mine just came out earlier, a month ago, called The Town Without Time. It really goes back into almost the beginning of my career as well as the latter part of my career. There's stories in there that I wrote in 2024. Dr. Bartha's Brownstone was one of those. I wrote as an 80-year-old, 85-year-old, 88-year-old reporter. But some of those stories are when I was a 23-year-old reporter, like the serendipitous journey stuff. There's a piece in this new book I wrote in 1957 about cats and alley cats in New York. I was 57. It's announced in the new book. It holds up. So I think if you're a storyteller, you tell a good story, and you write well, your work can live, even if it's journalism. It doesn't have to be dated to the day. It doesn't have to be newsworthy. Most of the reporting is newsworthy. I want to be news unworthy. I wanted to write about what is not news, but continue to be interesting if written well, 20, 30, 40 years hence. And that's been my story, my own personal story as a reporter, writer.
I've heard it said that the universal is in the details, that like the closer you get to the individual, the closer you can get to like a universal story. And I feel that in what you're saying, like when you wrote about Alden Whitman, who's the obituary writer from Mr. Bad News, and Herbert Kessner, is that, from Times Square Anniversary? And so we were wondering what made people like Kessner and Whitman like stand out to you? Like if you're looking around and you're sort of looking at the entire fabric of New York society, how did you pick out specific people you wanted to speak to? And then when you approached them, if they didn't feel like they were newsworthy, did they take some convincing, or were they excited to talk to a reporter?
Being my kind of reporter, writer, with my ambition, the first step is to be accepted by the people you want to write about. The people I want to write about are people whose stories I believe has been untold. I want to write about people that have not been interviewed before. I choose people that are new to the interview form and new to me. And I'm going to make them know me. I'm going to make them know me. And how do you start? You start by introducing yourself. And how do you do that? Well, you're knocking on a door and you're hoping to be entering into the life of someone else. Appearances matter at the beginning. Dressing well. I always had a tie and a jacket. I don't show up with a pair of blue jeans and a baseball cap and a t-shirt or sneakers. Dressing well. Why? Dressing for the story. You respect the story. You're dressing up for your profession. You're making an appearance of a favorable appearance, an attractive appearance. Just like you date up, you dress for a date, or you dress for a funeral. Why not dress for life? Dressing for an interview. Dress for it. They see you. They see they're impressed by how you look. Good manners. Very important to have good manners. Be polite with people. Not aggressive. Not pushy. Not gossipy. Trying to be very respectful of their own privacy, which you want to invade, but in the nicest way possible. What you want to do is convince them that they're worth a story, even if they have not been worth a story to anybody else. To me, they're worth a story. Why? Because I'm curious. Why am I curious? Because I'm looking to get inside the lives and heads of people that I believe are worth writing about and worth a part of the history of their time. I do this by telling them, I find your life interesting, even if you're not famous, even if you don't get your name in the paper, even if no one has ever written about you. I believe you're worth that. You say something about our time. Yeah, you're a plumber, you're a doorman, you cut hair, you pave the streets, you drive a tractor truck, whatever you do, you're saying something about your period in history. And I'm a chronicler. I'm a historian of people like you. And I want to write about you. And what do you want to know? How did you get to, what were you like when you were a kid? Who influenced you? How did you feel about where you are now? Do you want to change in 10 years? If so, how? All these questions. Little by little, I get to know them. Why? Because I'm easy to be around. Why? Because I'm polite. I dress well. My mother ran a dress shop in Ocean City, New Jersey. I watched the way she was with her women customers. Most of them were middle-aged. None of them were very attractive. They were not young women. There was a beach town, but they didn't go to the beach. These women were women of the afternoon. They shopped on the street. They played bridge. They were the wives or the daughters of prominent people, the mayor's wife, superintendent of school's wife, the surgeon's wife. They were the Buick dealer's wife. My mother catered to these large-sized women who had deep pockets and she made them look better with good dresses. She'd let them in front of the mirror, and she talked to them, and she got to know who they were. She knew her clients. She knew her sources. I, as a journalist, have to know my sources. My stories are people that don't buy dresses, but they buy me as a storyteller of their lives. That's important. Knowing how to deal with the customer. I learned as a boy in the store, my mother's dress shop, how to behave. I listened to their stories too. They weren't talking about dresses all the time, talking about their lives. And I thought that's interesting. That's interesting. They're not in the newspaper feature writers. They weren't in the newspaper. I started working for the newspaper when I was in high school. I wrote high school news. The Ho City Sentinel Ledger is a weekly newspaper. So I was both learning to write on an old typewriter and learning how to listen and how to be polite, how to make a nice appearance. My father was a tailor. I was always close to nicely made clothes. So those two influences, my father the tailor, my mother the dress with the boutique owner of his prominent store in a prominent block in my little town, were my first teachers. I see journalists today, they dress terribly. Journalists dress terribly. They interview the photographers, they go to cover the president, they're dressed like they're going to a tailgate party at a football stadium. They look like they're going to a football stadium, not to a job that is an important one. Being a reporter is an important job. It's important. It's pride worthy. You should be proud of what you're doing and dress the part of being a prideful person. I don't know if I make any impression with journalists today, but they look terrible.
I have to agree.
And they don't write so well either because they rely too much on the technology. They don't show up. In my work, you have to show up in person. You're talking to me in person. I don't want to talk on a telephone. I want to talk to somebody. I can see their eyes, study them. I watch people watching me, and that's important. Being an observer. All these things are not taught in journalism school. They come out of your own character, your own background. So, what else?
Well, so as I mentioned, I read Frank Sinatra Has a Cold for the first time when I was 17. And I reread it again this week in preparation to come and talk to you. And it was so much longer than I remembered and so much richer. And I am now a photographer. And what I noticed as I was reading it is how cinematic it is. And I was wondering, when you weave that cinematic scene, are you picturing it? What's your process? How do you weave that for the reader?
Well, I said in the beginning, I'm a short story writer, but I'm writing factually. Scenes are part of storytelling. When you go to a movie, there's an opening scene. I write as if I'm a movie writer. A scene, Sinatra at a bar with two blondes flanking him, and the reflection in the light of the bar, and lonely and smoking. Scene in the life of Sinatra on a Saturday night at a club called the Daisy. That could be the opening scene of a movie. I write as if I'm writing scenes in movies, or short stories, or scenes, or novels. Novels. I mean, Honor Thy Father like a novel. Thy Neighbor's Wife. Oh God, so many stories within that book that is cinematic. In fact, it sold at the movies for $2.5 million. It wasn't made because the company, the United Artists was the company, went broke on a movie called Heaven's Gate, I think it was called. Cimino's movie called Heaven's Gate. The company United Artists, but they bought my book. It never made the movie, but they paid me $2.5 million. It was a scenic book. Thy Neighbor's Wife. You could make many movies out of that. So Sinatra is a small achievement in my life. It's a big achievement in your life because it's probably the only thing you read. I don't know if you read anything else. But a lot of that's true of some. But it's just a magazine piece. I wrote better magazine pieces than that. But just Sinatra's famous, and I got a ride on Sinatra's fame, I think.
Well, I guess that was that was my next question, really, which is, unfortunately, I didn't have time to read more of your work before I came to see you, but I look forward to reading it. But I was wondering what your relationship is with that piece, because it's a celebrity profile. It's something you didn't really want to do, and now it's attached to you. It follows you. Is that okay with you? How do you feel about it?
Better than nothing.
Yeah, fair enough. Another thing that I noticed is that in your classic features, there are these very frank physical descriptions of people, and they're not always flattering. And I can't help but feel that is less welcome in journalism now.
What?
And that describing people physically, even when I was in journalism school, was often said like to not.
You have to describe. You're a storyteller. You're describing. Your scene. It's a scene. The reader deserves to know what the writer, me, sees. And I'm trying to make the reader see what I saw. And in order to do that, I'm trying to describe the people I wrote about and what they look like and how they dress and their manners, their manners and their very persona. That's what I'm doing. I'm a portrait painter. If you're doing a portrait, you have to show what they look like. Why do it otherwise? I don't know what you're talking. You're talking about the younger generation being sensitive. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I just think that you don't really read very frank physical descriptions of people, and it is discouraged in journalism school now you want to avoid stereotypes and anything like that. So I think people are so careful.
I don't deal with stereotypes. I deal with particular individuals. The reason the writing is so bad in nonfiction, the reason there are no Tom Wolfes anymore, there are no David Halpers, there are no Norman Mailer's writing or Joan Didion. There are no Joan Didions anymore. Why? I mean, my generation is dead almost. I'm 90. I'll be 93 soon. I'll be 93. All my contemporaries, most of them are dead. The people who used to write for Esquire, Gore Vidal, Norman Mailer, Joan Didion, David Halberstam, who was a journalist but a good writer. Bob Caro was a good writer, writes mostly known for his Lyndon Johnson, Bob Moses book. Good writer. John McPhee at the New Yorker, Bud Trillin. They're my people. But where are the young ones? I don't see them. They're relying on tape recorders all the time. They're also so politically correct. They're so right and righteous and afraid of saying the wrong thing. They lost their tool. They lost their valuable weapon of being an observer writer, not just an observer, but a writer, as much as some of the great fiction writers are, Fitzgerald or Hemingway, or Carson McCullers or Mary McCarthy. Good writers whose work lives on now, even though they've been dead for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. That's not true. Journalism had better writers when I was a journalist in the 1960s than today. The New York Times has some good writers. One of them, Dan Barry, is a very good writer. But they're not encouraging writers. You see writers with two bylines. In the New York Times every day. There are two names on a story. It's not like you have a lyricist and a Oscar Hammerstein, and the writers, like, you can't have two people write one story. It has to be the personality of one writer. You see two bylines all the time.
Yeah.
Now on Woodward Bernstein is just hack reporting. That wasn't great writing. It was reporting. Okay, that's investigative journalism. That's something else. I don't deal with that. But I'm talking about writing. Can write a sentence, can describe a scene. Like all my work, not just Sinatra. Anything I write, whether it's magazine form or book length, is scenes. You don't get that from being afraid of saying the wrong thing or writing the wrong thing or describing wrongly. You don't describe well, you describe accurately as much as the facts and figures that you use. You describe their facial, the color of their eyes, how they dress, how they move their hands. That stuff, that's there.
Yeah.
Woke. I hate that woke word. God, I hate it. But I think it's pervaded the academic life and the journalism life.
I think, journalism has become something that you have to go to a liberal arts school for the most part to get the degree before you can get the job. I mean, do you think that the institutions that now support journalists have any role to play in developing people? Because, Esquire is not buying 6 stories a year anymore from anybody.
I think journalism schools, all due respect, you went to journalism school. They're not producing.
Don't spare my feelings. I want to hear what you have to say.
I don't care. I'm saying what I want to say.
Good.
The writer is not in the journalism in this generation as it was 4 generations ago when I was a young writer. 3 generations ago. The difficulty is also there are not as many newspapers and magazines now as when I was doing it. The New Yorker is the one magazine that's still there. I'll tell you, the rest of the magazines I wouldn't even bother reading. I read the New Yorker. David Remnick is a terrific writer and editor. He keeps the standard of writing in that magazine. Should he leave, I don't know what's going to happen. Vanity Fair used when Graydon Carter was there. Vanity Fair was a good magazine. It's not anymore. When I used to write for Esquire, it was a great magazine. It doesn't even exist now unless it comes out maybe every other month, if that. Harper's, where Willie Morris was the editor, and Halberstam was writing for it, and John Corey and Norman Mailer and Tom Wolfe were writing for Harper's as well as Esquire and New York Magazine. The Harper's is not there either anymore. So it's hard for a young student at Columbia or some other college that has a journalism school. What can the future be? You have to have a tape recorder. At the tape recorder, you lost your eyes. It becomes an audio report. What people say, Q&A. I don't want to hear questions that answer the questions. I want to know what people think, not what they say, but what's in their head. That's why I turn a monologue. I want to know what people are thinking. That's why I ask them, "What are you thinking?" Not what you. Who cares what they say? They tell me what they want me to hear, maybe. But deeper reporting, more personal, getting to know your people over a period of time so well, they become a kind of partner in your prose. A partner in your prose. That's what they become under my aegis. And that's what I want. That's what I get. And when I get what I want, it not only works for today, it worked 20 years, 30 years, 40 years ago. The last book, as I mentioned, A Town by That Time, some of that stuff, when I was written, when I was 24 years old. And now I'm 90, I'm 93 years old, and some of that stuff is written when I was in my 90s, like Dr. Bartha's story, which is a big story. That book just came out. I hope I'm making sense to you, am I?
Yes, absolutely. What's it like to sort of commune with your younger self, putting those two pieces of, those bookends of your career now, your career when you started? A lot of writers look at their old writing and they feel like it's not good. How do you feel about yours?
Boy, the opposite. I feel it's really good.
That's fantastic.
Well, no, I have pride. I never, when I was 23 or 22 or 21, or even a high school kid writing for the town newspaper about high school news, everything I wrote was, I thought I was the best I could because it's going to live. It's going to be in the history books. It's going to be in a microfilm somewhere. When I'm dead 25 years later, someone's going to go read what I wrote. And I wanted it to be good. I wanted it to be well written. I wanted to testify to the fact that I cared greatly about what I wrote. Even if it was a caption, it was a little story, a big story, a book, makes no difference. My name was on it. My pride was in the label. When I wear a great suit, it's the label, who made it. That's who made what I write, who made it, me. And I'm responsible for that. And it has to be good. And as I say, I might be dead next month, but I still die knowing that all I wrote was the best I could, and I like what I wrote. I'm proud of what I wrote. And if I didn't have pride of what I wrote, I would be so ashamed and I would be so depressed. My life would be a misspent life. My life was not a misspent life at all. It was a very glorious life, a great life. I lived a big life. I'm a writer of ordinary people, but I lived a big life because I made my life big by the writing. Yes, I didn't win a Pulitzer Prize. I don't care. I didn't win I'm not a prize-winning writer, but in my head, I'm a prize-winning writer because I did my very, very best, and I never let go. I never shortcut. No shortcuts. I worked the sentence as well as I could. I labored over a sentence. It may look like it's easy reading now, but it was hard writing then. And that's why it's easy reading now, because I wrote the work in, making it seem easy. Joe DiMaggio ran around center field in the Yankee Stadium, made it look easy. Ran, caught the ball, made it look easy. I make it look easy. That's what I want.
It does look easy from the outside, but I never imagined it was. Let's see. You've touched so many of these questions already here. I guess, I mean, what I really want to hear, I want to hear your gripes. Like, what do you want to see change in journalism? Are you frustrated? Are you afraid for the future? It seems like there's some emotion underneath there. What is that?
I'm speaking to you now in the early days of the Trump administration.
Yeah.
Journalism, the political journalists that covered Trump first administration, that covered Biden's 4 years, and now dealing with Trump revived, is so one-sided. It's so political. I watch television and I read the New York Times. I read the New Yorker. I don't read much else. Because if you read the New York Times every day, it takes 2 hours to read the paper.
Yeah,
I really read it.
I do too.
I don't read it online. I read the piece, the print. And the people that report the news are educated. They're young. They're usually young people. They're 25 or 35, maybe 45, but that's pushing it. They're like athletes. They get old, and you're replaced as a journalist. When I was 32, I felt old. That's why I got out of there at 32. I'm not going to be 42 in journalism. I'm too old. I want to be more me and less them. I want to be more me and less the Times man. I felt that. I was individually motivated. I felt I wanted to be like Philip Roth or like Sean Updike or like Ernest Hemingway or someone that had an identity as a writer. Carson McCullers has an identity as a writer. I mentioned Mary McCarthy was a favorite writer of mine as well when I was young. The politics make it hard for me to read with satisfaction what's in the newspaper because I see the political bias of every reporter I read. I can see it. I shouldn't see it, but the editorial influence on daily reporting is profound. What they don't write, how they use a picture, the headline size, the headline, what the contents of the words, the way a story is played, the way a story is approached is very political, very political. What the journalists missed from the time of before Trump was elected the first time was a great body of unreported people that I specialize in. It didn't report important people. Journalists report on powerful people, personal successes, movie stars, ballerinas, baseball leading hitters, generals, presidents, secretary of state, the success stories. I don't want success stories. I want the people who are relevant to the time in which they live, but are not reported upon. Journalists don't do that and don't do enough of that. They do some of that, but not enough of that. And they were so surprised when Trump won. That whatever you say about Trump, and you can say that the worst things in the world have not only said, but are reported every fucking day. The guy knew because he came from a working class family that dealt with construction, real estate, the ordinary people, real estate, landlords, people who rent, people who buy, people who construct, bricklayers, steel workers, are Trump people, and he understood that class. He went to Ivy League school, took business administration. Son of a well-to-do man, Fred Trump. Still, he worked around working class people, and he understood that. I understand it too, and I write about it. Journalists didn't write about those people, and then they're so surprised when Trump was elected, and re-elected, even more surprised because for 4 years they've been knocking Trump apart. Criminal record, raping, hanging around with a hooker, all that stuff, that crazy stuff. And they celebrated this. There was a lawyer for named Avenatti before that prostitute. What's her name? The prostitute. I can't remember.
Stormy Daniels?
Huh?
Was it Stormy Daniels?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know.
I'm not sure.
Oh, that's the porn star that he
Was that the one? Stormy Daniels.
With Trump. And
Michael Cohen was Michael.
And paid her off, yes. Mm-hmm.
That whole story. Avenatti is a crook, but for a while they had him running for president. He was on every. Michael Avenatti, the lawyer, the crooked lawyer for her, was on television almost every night for a week, he was the anti-Trump hero. The guy they made this guy almost worthy of running for political office. He thought about it. How crazy could journalism be to give space and devotion to a crook like Michael Avenatti, if I have the name right, and Michael Cohen? They made Cohen into a hero. He's a crook.
Yeah.
Sure, Trump is a crook, but he's a crook. They did with the crooks, but they have the media favorite crooks and the media real villains. They determine that politically.
I guess along the lines of Donald Trump, you're such a student of New York City, of the fabric of New York City, and he's such a famous New Yorker. So you've already kind of offered this, but I did want to know if you have insight into, like, did you see his presidency coming in ways that other people didn't, because you understand?
Sure.
This.
I didn't think he'd. I didn't think he'd be president of the United States. I didn't think he'd do that. But I thought he was a very important person. I knew him a little bit. I'm a baseball fan, Yankee fan, ever since the Yankee trained in Atlantic City near my hometown in 1944. Because of gas rationing, he couldn't go to Florida. When the Yankees were owned by George Steinbrenner, I knew George Steinbrenner. I met him through mutual friends. And I knew I was sitting in Steinbrenner's box after CBS sold the Yankees to Steinbrenner. And I met Trump that way. And often Trump would give me a ride home. He'd leave the game after the seventh inning. And he has a limousine outside. And he asked me if I want to ride. And I many times rode down from Yankee Stadium to Trump. He doesn't live far from where I live, on the east side of Manhattan. And I know him pretty well. And I thought he like a lot of big shots. He has his bluster, but so he's like a lot of people like that. And especially in the Steinbrenner's box. There are a lot of New York real estate people, political people, all kinds of operators, achievers, go-getters, opportunists. A lot of networking was done in that Steinbrenner box. Held about 60 people, that big glassed-in partition above the playing field. And I was there with him. So I had some insight into him. I was never so sure he would win a presidency, but I was not surprised that he knew his audience. And also, a lot of people might agree, the way he behaved when he was shot in Pennsylvania, in Butler, or whatever it is, the way he still had control of himself when he was shot. He used to fight. He didn't go crying on the floor, and he wanted to know where the hell his shoes were. Because he really had a sense of presence. I mean, that's a remarkable achievement. When people are about to be killed, how they behave. Maybe on a battlefield you can see it. Maybe in a boxing ring you can see it. But you can see it politically, the way he behaved on the stage when he was being a target for an assassin. That's really, I don't care what Peter Baker or Maggie Haberman wants to write, or what somebody on MSNBC wants to say about him. That is telling. That's very, very telling, the way he behaved in that moment of peril, of potential death. That is impressive.
It was exceptional.
That's part of his character.
Yeah.
They can say they made lies. He's okay.
So, what do you think, or what are you thinking about this moment right now with Trump being inaugurated for a second time? I know a lot of people who are very anxious, very worried about the future. Are you?
I was worried about the Biden future too. How we got into war in Afghanistan, how we got into war in Iraq, how we got into war in Ukraine. I'm not for that war in Ukraine. The ambitious Zelensky wanted to be close to NATO, wanted to join the West. Not everybody wants to join the West in Ukraine, and Russia has the Russian people have a right to worry about NATO being next door to them if Zelensky would open the door, and NATO would, if NATO were to accept the Ukraine as a member, it'd be very, very dangerous for the Russian people. See things from the Russian point of view. See things from the Venezuelan point of view. They say this guy stole the election. That's what Trump said too. Moderno, I'm talking about. That's in Venezuela. Or Gaddafi when he was the head of Libya. Libya was better off under him. Iraq was better off under Saddam Hussein than these clowns that are in there now. And where's Karzai in Afghanistan? They was probably better under the Taliban than under when the Americans were trying to run that place. American foreign policy is very. I'm really worried about American foreign policy.
Yeah.
They're meddle in other people's. China. In my lifetime, the biggest story of my lifetime is China. When I was born in 1932, or when I was 10 years old, going to Yankees, watching spring training, Atlantic City Yankees. China was, no one gave a damn about China. They were just coolies, just poor people, built the railroads, exploited people. In my lifetime, as I now in 2025, Chinese are a second power in the United States. All this happened from growing up to Mao's revolution from 1949, when they finally got that crook Chiang Kai-shek out of it, he fled to Taiwan. The Chinese nation has become, little by little, a world power. Great story, how that nation was transformed from a bunch of losers and people that nobody helped the Chinese. Whatever they got themselves, because nobody helped them. Americans didn't help them. No Lend-Lease over there. No Marshall Plan for China. But now the regime of currently of the President Xi is dead. And we go over there and send people like Nancy Pelosi or other to Taiwan, to Taipei, to meddle in their affairs. Because the Chinese were send people to Puerto Rico. How would we like it? It's terrible what we're doing. I mean, and it's also in Ukraine was sending fuel, and the war in God, the war in Gaza. I mean, that is just astonishing. 50,000 people killed, many of them babies, many of them women, a large percentage, and they get away with it. The Israeli, they make it anti-Semitic. It's not anti-Semitic. What's not anti-Semitic, just to hate what's going on. The military of Israel is committing atrocities that are war crimes. They really are. Or those are things a war crime. What they accuse the generals in Yugoslavia during the Serbian war crimes. People go to war. It's just terrible. And the reporting is not fully, they're not exposing, they don't write about Israel as they should. They're afraid of being called anti-Semitic. A trap journalist. And Biden keeps fueling that. But it's both wars. He gave arms to Ukraine and arms to Netanyahu, enormous amounts of, and well, that's what we do.
So I feel like I'm hearing you say that you want journalists to be more courageous. I feel like I'm hearing you say that you want to see more courage from journalists.
Yeah. There's no Halberstam. Halberstam and Neil, I'm sorry, I'm old and I sometimes forget names.
I can't remember anybody's name either. I'm young, so.
That Vietnam War under Lyndon Johnson and General Westmoreland, that was an atrocious, and they reporters, Halberstam reported that. What a Pulitzer Prize. Dale Sheehan was the man, I'm sure, and others. There's nothing like that. There's no Dale Sheehan, Halberstam coverage of Iraq. On the contrary, they had New York Times reporters justifying this weapons of mass destruction charade.
That's shameful.
Judy Miller, New York Times, covered up for those people. That's terrible. It's terrible.
What can be done?
Nothing.
What has to happen?
Nothing. You can't. Reformers now. If you used to speak out right now, you lose your job. The television. You lose your job as a television reporter or commentator or a reporter for a newspaper. New York Times a couple of years ago published an article about, I think Tom Cotton was the senator that they were writing about, and what they were writing was contrary to what the woke reporters of the Times wanted, and they kicked out the reporter, the editor of the editorial page. I said, boy, the editor is supposed to have opinion, free opinion. This was contrary to opinion to what the reporters liked. And they had a revolution in the city room, and the editor of the editorial page has lost his job. That's the New York Times. You think that's the most independent expression of media in the world. Even that made your job not secure if you lean the wrong way. I'm not happy about that. I don't think anybody should be happy about that. Right now, if I'm saying what I'm saying to you, if I was 45 years old and I had a job with CNN or a job in the New York Times or the Washington Post, I'd lose my job. The way I'm talking to you now, if I had a job to lose, I'd lose it. Fortunately, they can't get me a 90. What can they do to me now? Shoot me, give me some poison pill, my martini.
Sounds like a good way to go.
Yeah, thank you. Story's over, right?
Yeah.
Goodbye. Goodbye, everybody.